The morning sun cast long shadows across the crystal streets of Velia, but Juno barely noticed its beauty anymore. At 8 feet and 2 inches tall, she had learned to see the world differently than most. Every doorway was a challenge. Every crowd was a maze of stairs. Every day was a reminder that she didn't belong. Her body was too big to have children, so they pushed her away from their perfect society. But only one human had ever made her feel like a mother. Only one person had ever looked at her with love instead of fear. The people always laughed when she walked into the town square. It wasn't just the children, though their giggles cut the deepest. The adults were worse. Older women with thin shoulders and delicate faces would whisper cruel things while pretending to be kind. "She's too tall to carry anything except shame," one woman said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "She must have been made for a different planet," another added, one with higher ceilings and wider doors. They didn't even try to hide their mean laughter anymore. After all, she wasn't really one of them. She was just a visitor, a mistake in their perfect genetic code. Juno knew every inch of her unusual height. She knew exactly how her head barely cleared the glowing arches of Velia's main building. She knew how her wide hips squeezed uncomfortably between the seats on public transport. She knew how her hands long-fingered, rough, and unladylike always curled around her backpack. Not because she was scared, but because being so tall made her feel like an animal in a zoo. "Look," a small child whispered, pulling on its mother's sleeve. "Is she broken?" The woman didn't answer right away. She just smiled, cold and pitying. "She's human," she finally said in a gentle voice that somehow made it worse. "They don't make them right." Juno kept walking, her heavy boots echoing too loudly on the biostone streets. Even the ground seemed to betray her, unable to carry her weight quietly. The thud, thud, thud of her steps felt like punishment she couldn't escape. She ducked under the lattice arch again, the same one that had left a scar on her forehead during her first week here. The wound had healed, but she still flinched at the memory. Someone nearby laughed at her awkward movement. "They should have brought a shorter model," came a voice from a group sitting near the herb vendor's stall. "I heard humans come in normal sizes too," another person added with cruel amusement. "She's not sick," a third voice said in that careful tone people use when they're trying not to sound mean but failing completely. "She's just unparable." There it was again, that awful word, unparable. They didn't mean she couldn't find love not here on Velia. They meant something much worse. They meant she couldn't have babies. She was, by all their scientific measurements, an empty shell, a woman without purpose. Juno's body didn't respond to the special process the Velans use to help people have children. It was the first thing they had tested when she arrived, even before they showed her where to sleep or wash. Her body showed no signs of fertility, no connection to their mothering systems, no ability to bond with children the way their women could. "She has no frequency," the medical technician had said, staring at the test results in confusion. "No harmonic window," another had corrected in simple terms. Her womb was silent. On Velia, that meant everything. It meant her strength, her intelligence, her skills. None of it mattered. Her tall frame, once celebrated on Earth's sports fields, was now just a joke. A mistake they had to tolerate but would never accept. And still, she walked through the sparkling streets of this alien city every day. She endured the whispers. She pretended not to hear the apologetic tones in the translator's voice when it announced her presence. Subject Juno of Earth, human female, class, unlinked. She hated that title most of all. Unlinked, not individual, not diplomatic representative, just a body they had no use for. She paused on the bridge that overlooked the lower levels of the city. The sun was setting, and twin moons cast a pale purple glow across the glowing plants that sparkled along the water's edge. From up here, the world looked peaceful, beautiful even, but the silence only made the pain in her chest feel deeper. Back home on Earth, she had been a captain, a team leader, a woman whose voice carried authority and whose steps held confidence. Here, she was just an oddity to be tolerated, a walking reminder that humans were too rough and clumsy to fit into something as elegant as Velian society. A gust of wind caught her jacket. She pulled it tighter, though the weather wasn't really cold. Her reflection shimmered in the water below. Too tall, too wide, all sharp angles and heavy limbs. She tried to imagine herself as they saw her, oversized, clumsy, biologically useless. The sadness wasn't sharp anymore. It had become a constant, quiet ache, like a ringing in her ears that never stopped. A tinnitus of the soul That evening, she took the long way back to her living quarters. She walked past the cliffside gardens, through the edge of the dark grove where few citizens wandered after sunset. She liked the silence there. It didn't judge her. It didn't measure her. It just existed. She reached her favorite overlook and sat heavily on the stone edge, letting her legs hang into the darkness below. Her back ached. Her ankles throbbed from carrying her unusual weight all day. The backpack she carried dug in two. Her shoulder blades like a constant reminder of her burden. She hadn't eaten since morning. She rarely remembered to eat anymore. The hunger had faded into something more manageable than the pain of being stared at. Above her, stars flickered in patterns she didn't recognize. Different constellations than Earth. Alien stories she would never understand. She wondered if any of those distant suns shone on women like her. Women who were too large, too strong, too visible to be loved. Then she saw movement in her peripheral vision. She turned her head slowly. Down the path, half hidden by the glow of ground lights, stood a figure. A man, human like her, but shorter, maybe 5 feet 11 inches by her estimation. His posture was quiet and calm. His hands were tucked into the pockets of a field coat. His hair was dark and messy from the wind. When their eyes met, his didn't flicker with curiosity or discomfort. There was no measuring look, no quick assessment of her size or threat level, just quiet recognition, as if he was seeing her, really seeing her for the first time in months. He didn't approach, he didn't wave or call out, but he didn't look away either, and that meant everything. Later, she would remember this moment perfectly. The silence, the way the stars seemed to witness their brief connection, the expression on his face that said, "I see you," without speaking a single word. But in that moment, all she could do was lower her eyes, not out of shame, but out of surprise. She wasn't used to being seen without being measured. She wasn't used to being noticed without being judged. The man stayed for a few more seconds, then turned and walked away. His footsteps were quiet on the stone path, unlike her own thunderous movements. She stayed on the ledge long after he disappeared, one hand resting over her heart as if trying to memorize what it felt like when someone didn't flinch from her. Shadow. She didn't know his name yet, but something inside her had changed. Not healed exactly, not softened, but cracked open, just a little, and cracks, as she had learned, were where light got in. Juno didn't sleep that night. She lay perfectly still on the narrow bed in her assigned living space. The room was simple, square, and sterile like a medical facility. The walls hummed quietly from the power source buried deep below the building. A single vine from the outside architecture had grown through the ceiling vent. It pulsed with soft blue light, like a heartbeat she didn't recognize. She watched it for hours, mesmerized by its gentle rhythm. Sleep wouldn't come. Not after the way he had looked at her, not stared, not assessed, not examined like a specimen, just looked, with genuine interest and respect. She couldn't remember the last time someone had seen her without immediately calculating her size, her potential usefulness, or her level of threat. That man Rowan, if she remembered his name correctly, had watched her like he was reading a language he only half understood but desperately wanted to learn. That shouldn't have mattered. Not here. Not on this planet where her usefulness was questioned daily and her worth was treated like a diplomatic favor. And yet, his gaze had burrowed under her ribs like a slow, warm burn. The next morning, her limbs felt heavier than usual. She rolled her shoulders until they cracked loudly in the quiet room. She reached for the hydration unit and swallowed 2 large gulps of filtered mineral water. She skipped breakfast again. She wasn't hungry anyway and pulled on her standard work uniform. Another day of silent endurance awaited her. She made her way toward the lower section of the city, where mineral scanning equipment had broken down overnight. It was standard maintenance work, hands-on and dirty, her kind of job. The kind of work where her size was actually helpful instead of problematic. The corridors were less crowded this early in the morning, fewer eyes watching her every move. Fewer whispered comments about her unusual appearance. The stone tiles under her feet were slick with morning condensation. Her boots squeaked once, and she winced. Every sound she made always seemed louder than it should be. The entrance to the mineral sector was lined with curved black stone spires. They were elegant and beautiful, like everything on Velia, but unkind in how they forced her to bend and stoop to enter. She ducked her head, stepped through carefully, and found herself unexpectedly not alone. Rowan was already there. He knelt beside the scanner's core mechanism, elbow deep in the open housing unit. Tools were scattered and neat, organized patterns beside him. He didn't look up when she entered the room. Juno hesitated at the doorway. She could leave. She could turn around, request a different assignment, and pretend this was all a scheduling mistake. Instead, she cleared her throat softly. Rowan glanced up, his eyes adjusting to the soft artificial light. There was no surprise on his face. No awkward fumbling for words, just that same calm, steady gaze that had unsettled her the night before. Didn't expect help, he said simply, his voice carrying no judgment. I didn't know you'd be here, she replied honestly. Silence settled between them, not sharp or uncomfortable, not cold or distant, just waiting. Like the moment before dawn, Rowan sat back on his heels, wiping his hands clean on a work rag. Scanners cycling wrong, he explained without being asked. Feedback loops are overloaded. Probably a thermal bridge collapse in the main processing unit. She nodded, understanding the technical problem immediately. Can I help? I know my way around electrical systems. I know how to keep my fingers from getting fried, she added, with the slightest hint of humor. Most days anyway. A flicker of a smile crossed his face. Barely there, but genuine. He shifted slightly to make room beside the equipment. She dropped to her knees next to him, feeling the hard stone dig into her legs, but she didn't complain. Her hands moved automatically to the auxiliary control panel, fingers scanning for heat signatures and feeling for vibration patterns that might indicate problems. The work grounded her. It was mechanical, predictable, logical. Nothing here laughed at her unusual size or questioned her biological worth. They worked together smoothly. No need to explain every movement, no interruptions or awkward small talk. Just tools pass back and forth when needed, and the occasional nod of understanding. Time seemed to slow down and thin out around them. The silence grew comfortable, almost companionable. At one point, their hands brushed against each other, both reaching for the same cable connector at the same time. She froze instantly, so did he, but neither of them pulled away immediately. Her eyes lifted slowly to find his. His had already found hers, waiting patiently. It was barely a moment. A single breath caught between them like a bubble. But something shifted in that space. It wasn't desire, not yet. It wasn't even longing. It was recognition, the kind that comes not from sight alone, but from understanding what it means to survive quietly in a world that doesn't want you. The scanner suddenly hissed back to life around them. Status lights flickered from red to green. The mechanical humming stabilized into a healthy rhythm. They stood up slowly, brushing dust from their knees. She towered over him, a full head and shoulders taller than his frame. The difference should have made things awkward, uncomfortable, strange. But he didn't shrink away from her height. He didn't make jokes about it. He just looked up at her like it was normal. Like she was normal. Juno shifted the weight of her tool belt on her hip, suddenly aware of how the leather dug into her waist. Thanks, he said, his voice low and genuine. I could say the same thing, she replied. You usually work alone on these repairs? I don't usually get assigned to work with humans, he answered, tilting his head slightly in thought. They think you can't pair with anyone, she said, the bitterness creeping into her voice despite her efforts to stay neutral. They think a lot of things about people like us. I don't, he said simply. And then, with deliberate softness, he added, I watch instead of assuming. She held his gaze, searching his face for signs of pity or false kindness. She found neither. Why? She asked finally. Because you move like someone who's forgotten how to be seen, he answered without hesitation. She swallowed hard, feeling her throat tighten around words she couldn't speak. The room felt smaller suddenly, but not in a claustrophobic way. More like the walls had moved closer to create intimacy instead of imprisonment. He stepped back, not away from her, but simply giving her space, noticing her need for room to breathe, respecting her boundaries without making a big deal about it. I'll log the repair in the system, he said, gathering his tools with practiced efficiency. She nodded, not trusting her voice to stay steady. He turned to leave, pausing briefly at the doorway. Without looking back, he said quietly, You're not unparable, Juno. You just don't fit in the cages they built for everyone else. Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the humming mechanical silence. She stood there for a long time, one hand resting on the warm scanner housing, her heart pounding louder than any machinery she had ever worked on. No one had ever said anything like that to her. Not without a sneer, not without pity, not without some hidden agenda or cruel joke waiting to be revealed. What hope felt like it was a strange, vulnerable thing, but she didn't look away from it, not this time. The next few days passed in silence, but not the kind that hurt. Juno resumed her work without fanfare. Assignments came and went, drones buzzed through corridors. The city pulsed with its usual quiet elegance. She ate when she remembered, drank when her vision blurred, and stretched her legs on the long walks between sectors. But something had changed. She found herself listening for footsteps that matched Rowan's gait. She noticed the way certain doors opened just a little slower when he walked in behind her. She noticed that for the first time in weeks, she wasn't avoiding eye contact. He never sought her out, never forced conversation, but he was there, always quietly, always steady, always noticing. On the fourth day, Cher received a temporary reassignment to the outer agricultural terraces. Not a punishment, just a task no one else wanted. Too far, too exposed to primitive. She accepted without comment. By mid-morning, she was hiking alone down the moss-slicked ridge that led to the lower basin, pack strapped tight to her back, the weight of tools pressing down across her shoulders. The air changed here, less refined, less filtered. The scent of soil replaced the sterile ozone tang of the upper city. The horizon opened wide, an unsymmetrical stretch in Jinto, fields of bioluminescent stalks swaying under distant sunbeams. She liked it. It felt unprocessed, uncurated. When she reached the main cultivation hub, a small tented structure tucked beneath a jutting cliff, she was surprised to see someone already, their head bent over a failing irrigation console. Rowan, of course. He looked up as she approached, didn't smile, just nodded once. Systems jammed, he said. Filter mesh collapsed. She set her pack down beside him without a word. They worked for hours. No translator drones, no sterile command tones, just fingers in wet soil, knees in the mud, breath sinking through exertion. Her sleeves were rolled high, biceps marked with dirt and sweat. Rowan's face was streaked with grime, hair pushed back by a band he'd cut from the hem of his shirt. Juno liked how human he looked, like that, unfinished, not perfectly pressed, not shrink-wrapped for approval. He looked like someone who'd learned to endure. Midway through the repair, the ski siphoned. Rain fell fast, not hard, warm and constant, soaking them in seconds. They didn't rush, didn't complain. The crops needed the water anyway. She stood back, arching. As she stretched out her spine, water cascading down the curve of her neck, her uniform clung to her body, and for the first time in a long while she didn't think about how she must look. Rowan stood beside her, chest rising slowly with the rain. He didn't speak, just turned his head and looked at her like a question answered. You don't flinch, she said softly, not turning. No reason to. Most men do, or stare. I didn't need to measure you to see you. She exhaled slow and tight. I used to be seen for what I could lift, what I could break, then what I couldn't carry. You've carried yourself. He said, that counts. They said nothing more. Later, after the rain had stopped and their work was done, they sat on the edge off cliffs overlooking the glowing plains. The clouds split apart in the distance, letting shafts of violet sunlight dance across the valley. The light caught on her wet hair. Rowan handed her a protein bar from his rations. She took it, biting off a piece to fast, choked, coughed once. He said nothing, just passed her his water tube. Thanks, she muttered, cheeks flushing. To eat like someone who forgets she's allowed to need things. She blinked. The words hit harder than they should have. Vetoing everyone, numbersome, just forget how to ask. She looked down at her hand, strong, callous, dirt under every nail. What did you leave behind? A scared voice, low. Rowan didn't answer right away. His fingers curled around the rim of the rock, knuckles pale. A family that talked over me, he said at last. Rooms I never quite filled. I was the smallest, testiest to forget. That's why I came here. I thought maybe in a world this far from home I could matter. In silence, she turned to face him fully. I was always too loud, she said. Even when I didn't speak, my body did the talking for me. It tried to fold, tried to vanish. But you can't hide an 8-2. In shadow, he studied her, not her size, not her shape. Her, you don't need to shrink. I don't know how to. Stop trying. Let me remind you, the words weren't romantic, they weren't flirtatious, they were something more dangerous. True, that night as they parted at the edge of the ridge, he didn't touch her, but his hand brushed her arm just once, fingers glancing across the curvy off her elbow. She didn't flinch, not this time. When she returned to her quarter, soaked to the skin raw from work, she didn't wipe the mud from her face. Right away, she looked in the mirror and saw something unfamiliar. Not someone small, not someone broken, someone still here, someone beginning to feel real again. The wind smelled like stone dust and wet copper. Juno stood at the edge off lower terraces, the slope beneath her feet, soft from the morning rains. The clouds were thin today, filtered sunlight spilling across the mist, veiled valley and long silver sheets. The light painted her skin like metal. She didn't move bend. Her footsteps crunched over the gravel, light ones familiar. Rowan didn't speak as he approached. She didn't turn to greet him. They didn't need to anymore. He stopped to pace behind her, waited. I didn't expect to be reassigned here again, she said. Neither did I, he replied. She smiled faintly. You think they're watching, they always are, but maybe they're not sure what they're looking at. She turned to face him, then slowly her body cast a long shadow over his, the difference in height undeniable. But Rowan never bristled beneath it, never made it feel like a joke or a novelty. Do I intimidate you? She asked, eyes steady. No, he said without pause, but I think you scare the people who built this place to feel safe in sameness. She inhaled sharply, not because seat hurt, but because it didn't. They moved to the slope's edge where the soil was warm, sitting side by side on an outcropping of root-covered stone. Below them, iridescent crops shimmered in slow waves, breathing with the rhythm of the wind. Juno stretched her legs out, boots caked in drying mud. She rolled up her sleeves. The sun kissed her forearms, pale scars catching the light, some faded, some recent. Most came from bare. Rowan offered her half of a nutrient bar. She took it. They ate insolence for a while, the kind of silence that only exists between people who have decided not to fill space with noise. Then he said, without looking at her, why did you come here? She didn't answer immediately. My file said cultural bridge specialist. My real job was to make the others comfortable with me being around, she said. To prove that someone like me, big, blunt, visibly human, could be non-threatening. And did you succeed? No, her voice was dry, but I played the part. Smiled when they asked about Earth's gravity, let them run their diagnostics, laughed when they made jokes about mating compatibility like I wasn't in the room. Rowan's jaw tensed. They thought I couldn't hear the drones whispering non-veal strain, she added, like I was deaf along with being useless. He turned to her. Your notes list. She met his gaze. You don't even know what I am. I know you're still here. That counts for something. She stared at him hard, long, like she was trying to decide if he meant it. He didn't look away. Back on Earth, she said after a beati was something. Captain of my school's gravity ball team, top of the class. They called me the Atlas Girl, said I carried our wins on my shoulders. He raised an eyebrow. They meant it as a compliment, she continued, until they ran my bioscan and found out I couldn't carry anything else. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. I'd never wanted kids until they told me I couldn't have them. Then it was all I could think about, what Mibity couldn't do, what it failed to be. Rowan didn't try to comfort her. He didn't say it wasn't true or that it didn't matter. He simply said, I'm sorry, it was enough. She leaned back on her elbows, letting the sun warm her face. What about you? She asked after a while. What brought you here? He hesitated, not out of shame, but because his answer was fragile. I was tired of being small. He said that surprised her. She turned to him, puzzled. I don't mean in height, he added, though I've always been the smallest in the room. He flexed one hand slowly, like remembering something. I come from a family of men who measured themselves in deck volume. Violence. I didn't fit, she said, nothing. Watching his profile, they told me I was too soft, that I'd get crushed out here, and maybe I would have if I hadn't learned that softness doesn't mean weak, just unarmored. He looked at her then. And sometimes the things without armor are the ones that survive longest because they know how to bend. Juno felt her throat tighten, headed more quietly. I didn't come here to be someone. I came here to stop being invisible. Her voice was barely a whisper. And now I see you, he said. That's a start. They sat in silence again, but this time it was different. Not avoidance, not distance, just two people letting memory breathe. The wind moved through the trees above them. A violet-winged insect hovered, then drifted off. The sun fell a little lower and the sky blushed faintly toward dusk. Juno shifted, her shoulder brushed against his. She didn't move away. He didn't either. Later, when they returned to their temporary base camp, their hands brushed again as they passed through the curtain of vines covering the entrance. This time he didn't pull away and she didn't let go. The past hadn't vanished, but now it had companion someone else to carry it with. Night settled over the base camp like a soft exhale. The wind had quieted. Even thine sex had fallen. Still a hush wrapped itself around the outer ridges, not empty but full of the things not yet said. Inside the tent, the lanterns were low, casting warm amber shadows across the walls. The scent of burnt resin and wet stone lingered in the canvas. Juno sat with her knees drawn loosely to her chest, back resting against one of the structural poles. Her hands were dirtish, hadn't bothered to clean them. She didn't care. Across from her, Rowan sat cross-legged, sleeves rolled, his shirt stained with soil and rain. He was watching her, not intrusively, not like someone with an agenda, just seeing her, letting his eyes rest where they wanted to. And she let him. She didn't shrink this time, didn't shift to make herself smaller, quieter, easier. For once she wanted to be fully visible, even if it scared her. "You're quiet," she said. "So are you," he answered. They didn't smile. Letty didn't have to. Later she moved to her bedroll, not saying a word. She sat unlaced, her boots peeled off her damp outer shirt. The air clung to her skin like breath. Her undershirt was damp, with sweet and dried salt. It smelled like her, real and human. She didn't look over when crossed the tent and knelt beside her, but she felt him. Not touching, not yet, just there. Juno turned her head. Rowan's gaze rose slowly from her arms to her throat. To her eyes he didn't reach, he didn't rush. Instead, he said quietly, "Do you want this?" Her breath caught. No one had ever asked her like that, not even when they should have. She nodded once, then again slower. "I don't know how to be gentle," she whispered. "Not with my body." "I do," he said. The first time their lips met, it wasn't seamless. Her mouth was broader than his, her hands larger. When she cupped his face, her fingers wrapped easily around the back of his neck, thumb resting just below his jawline. His hands came to her hips, not possessive, anchoring, assuring. Juno pulled back, breathing hard. "Tell me if it's too much." "It's not," he murmured. "I'm still here." She shifted, her legs folding to either side of him as she slowly settled in his lap. The weight of her was real, undeniable. Her thighs bracketed his with ease, her back curved over his smaller frame, yet he didn't flinch. Beneath her he held firm, held her. "Is this okay?" she asked, voice low, uncertain. He looked up at her from where he sat between her legs, his face level with her collarbone. "You feel like gravity," he said. "I want you to fall." They moved slowly. There was no choreography, no practiced rhythm, just two bodies learning the shape of one another. Juno's hands found the hem of his shirt, lifting it over his head. She touched his chest, fingers dragging across the trail of old scars and softness there. He reached for the hem of hers but stopped, looked at her, shenited. The cloth peeled away, her torso long, powerful, thick with muscle, was marked by time, not grooming. Her body was a history, and for the first time it didn't feel like something she had to defend. Rowan pressed a kiss just beneath her ribcage. She exhaled sharply, hand instinctively flying to his shoulder. "Sorry," he said, voice low. "Number, it's just no one's ever touched me there," she murmured. "I can stop, don't." They lay down together, her body stretched along his, enveloping him. He was cradled between her thighs, now looking up at her, breath already shallow. She moved carefully, learning the mechanics of her own strength in relation to his frame. Her hips rolled forward, testing. He grunted softly, head tilting back, hands gripping her sides. "You okay?" she asked. "More than okay," he breathed. She lowered herself further and they connected fully. The feeling took her breath away. Not just the sensation, though. That was fierce, overwhelming, unexpected in its pleasure. But the fit, it didn't make sense. Thigh sizes shouldn't align. The angles shouldn't work, but they did. Her body, for all its scale and breadth, fit him like it had waited for this. She rocked her hips slow and uncertain, watching his face. Hegesped, his hands rose to cup her face, trembling slightly. "God, Juno," Hugh whispered, "you feel like thunder." And she laughed, a real full-bodied sound that made her spine arch and her walls clench around him. He groaned, bucking upward involuntarily. "You okay?" She asked again, teasing. "This time you're terrifying," he said, eyes dazed. "Good." The rhythm built gradually, bodies finding the language they hadn't known they were fluent in. She moved over him with strength and reverence, her legs framing his hips, her body a cathedral around him. Each motion was slow, deep, measured. He met her, breath for breath, groan for groan, and when release came, it came like a tide, quiet but vast, ashing under the skin, a cry muffled in her throat, his arms tight around her face, buried against her chest as he shuddered. Undone. Afterward they stayed together, still joined, still breathing asone. Juno lowered her forehead to his, their sizes clashing and fitting all at once. "Was that?" He nodded before she could finish. "Yeah, it was." Later, curled against him with his head tucked under her chin, she felt the ache of her hips, the burn in her thighs, the slick between them drying against the cold air. But she didn't feel too big. She didn't feel like a mistake. She felt chosen, and for the first time in her life, she didn't wonder what it was like to be enough. She knew. She woke to warmth, not sunlight. Veilous dawnlight filtered blue and quiet through the fiber walls of their shelter, not the blankets. Those were half kicked off during the night. It was him, Rowan, still asleep, breath rising, and fulgurant the curve of her ribs, one arm slung across her stomach like instinct, like gravity, like something that didn't need permission to be there. Juno lay still, afraid to shift, afraid to move, not because she didn't want him near, because she didn't want the moment to vanish. His smaller body fit against hers like I'd been designed for this. To disappear into the space she'd spent a lifetime being told was too large to hold anything. But now, there he was, held. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. She had expected softness after everything. She hadn't expected quiet. But this was almost dangerous in how gentle it was. Rowan stirred. His eyelashes fluttered. She turned her head just slightly to look at him. "You're staring," he mumbled. "You drool in your sleep," she countered softly. "Only for women who break gravity laws." He said it without bravado, without easing, like a truth he'd just uncovered in himself. She looked away before he could see the smile pulling at her lips, but then something shifted. A small cramp, low and strange, not pain, but pressure. As though her body was trying to speak a language she hadn't used in years, she froze. Rowan noticed immediately. "What, nothing?" She lied. "Just sore." His hand moved gently to her back. "Too much?" "No," her voice was low. It wasn't too much, not even close. But the twinge was real. Later when they were up, when she was brushing soil from her boots, when he was boiling water for morning rations, she felt it again. A twist, deep and inexplicable. A flutter she dismissed as muscle strain even though muscles didn't flutter. She didn't mention it. Not yet. She watched Rowan pour water into the cups, focused and calm. His sleeves pushed up, forearms smudged from last night's work. His collar slightly askew. His hands steady high looked up. "What?" "Nothing," she said again, but in her stomach something whispered, "Everything." The ache didn't go away. It lingered for days, low and dull, like the afterecho of a voice too old to remember. Not pain, not sharp, just present. A new weight at her center, a pressure she couldn't stretch out, couldn't run off, couldn't explain. Juno blamed the work. The Ridge projects were labor-intensive, and though she carried twice as much as the other engineers, she rarely paused. She lifted, walked, climbed and bent over and over, ignoring the sting in her hips and the strange tightness in her chest. But by the fourth day, the excuses began to break apart. Her appetite had shifted, not vanished, just changed. She craved things that made no sense: spicy root paste, saline blocks. Once, she caught herself chewing the end off her glove. Salt. She wanted salt. Not flavor, not taste, just minerals. At neither skin felt electric, like her nerves were too close to the surface. Her breast socked with a fullness that had no cause. Her stomach turned at sudden smells. Ozone, raw metal, the sterile tang of diagnostic gels. She said nothing to Rowan, not when she snapped at him for Norrison, not when her vision blurred mid-task, not even when she woke up one night gasping. A sharp tightness curling beneath her ribs. He always noticed, but he didn't pry. He simply handed her water, adjusted the thermal blanket, rested a hand lightly on her shoulder until her breath slowed. She hated how easily heckled see her unraveling. On the seventh day, she collapsed. Not dramatically, not publicly, just a quiet failure in her knees while carrying a coil spool across the worksite. The ground didn't hit hard, but it felt like it did. Juno, Rowan's voice close, then hands warm, steady, lifting her up. "I'm fine," she snapped. "You're not." She tried to pull away, but the effort made her stomach roll. "Let me help." She let him. They walked in silence to the outpost clinic, a repurposed utility cabin with basic medical tech. Juno hated it immediately. It smelled like cold metal and recycled regretro, and keyed in the diagnostics himself, refused to call a technician. "I trust your eyes," she said softly. He didn't look up. "You shouldn't have waited this long." She didn't answer. The scanner buzzed, then beeped, then blinked, and Rowan went still. "What is it?" she asked, voice flat. He didn't speak. "Rowan, what's wrong?" Had turned the screen so she could see. Data streamed across in soft gold pulses. Numbers, hormone markers, levels she hadn't seen in years, some she'd never seen. One blinked. In red, HCG human chorionic gonadotropin elevated, rising, active. No, she breathed. Rowan nodded unceasingly. You're pregnant, Juno. The room shrank around her. She heard her own breathing like it was happening through water. Slow, warped, distant. That's not possible, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I know. I was classified non-viable, null, reactive. They ran full sync scans. My reproductive field was dormant. No harmonic signature. No cellular receptivity. I remember so how her hands were trembling. How could this happen? Rowan stepped forward cautiously. His voice was low but steady. Maybe you were never dormant, just never in resonance with the scanners. Or with them. She stared at the screen. Tiny pulses, fetal movement, primitive but steady. Something was growing inside her. Something her body had been told it could never hold. Something that had defied the precision of Valen medicine, of algorithms, of cold declarations. A possibility. I need to sit down, she whispered. He helped her to the bench, hands careful not to press too hard. She looked down at herself, not seeing her reflection, not seeing her shape, just feeling. I didn't feel broken until they told me I was, she said. You never were, he replied. I believed them. Me too. Her eyes flicked toward him. He smiled faintly. Until now, the next hours blurred. Vitals, blood pressure, tissue scans all confirmed the same thing. The pregnancy was real, viable, early, but stable. No synthetic pairing, no induced resonance, just her and him. Her body had done the thing it was never designed to do, and it wasn't hurting her. It was building something. That night, Juno didn't speak. She curled into her cot, wrapped into many layers, but still cold. Not physically, but inside, like the old wall she built to hold herself upright. Didn't know how to stand in this new world. Rowan stayed nearby, not hovering, just present. Eventually she spoke, barely louder than a breath. What if I'm Notre? You don't have to be. He said you just have to keep breathing. A silence passed, then she asked, are you afraid? Yes. She nodded. Good. He smiled. Me too. They made her walk through the center of the city, not because it was required, not by law, not even by custom, but because the elders' toes, finely boned, glimmer-kinned women perched in their crystalline chambers, wanted to see her, see the body they had mocked, see the gait they had once called clumsy, see the womb they had dismissed as dead, now carrying life. Rowan walked beside her, not a step behind. She didn't hold his hand, but she felt the heat of it near her, steady and unshaken. The path leading to the Hall of Accord was narrow, designed for slender Valen. From Miss Juno's shoulders brushed both sides. She didn't duck, not this time. The onlookers stood in silence, some with half-lidded eyes, others with mouths pressed thin, curiosity and discomfort mixing in the air like vapor. Children tilted their heads to look up at her, blinking. One pointed. She's bigger now, the child said aloud. She's carrying. Someone else murmured, impossible. Another snapped, but no one laughed. Not anymore. Inside, the hall was warm, too warm, deliberately uncomfortable. Fielders believed temperature discomfort revealed sincerity. Juno remained still beneath the artificial heat. Her palms were damp, her shirt clung to her spine, but her shoulders stayed high. Rowan stood to her right, silent, ready. The matriarch of records, gray, draped in woven root fibers, stepped forward. Her voice was thin, almost musical. You stand before us bearing a claim, she said, eyes narrowing, that your body demeasurement has conceived. I do not make claims, Juno replied. Her voice didn't tremble. I present facts. A soft murmur. Matriarch nodded to an attending medic who stepped forward with a scanner. The beam passed over Juno's abdomen. The screen bloomed with flickering data. Fetal presence confirmed, the medic said quietly. Heartbeat stable. 9 weeks gestation. No anomalies. Another whisper. Shock. Now confusion. Fear. The matriarch stared at the screen. Then at Juno. Your pairing was with this man, she nodded. Drowan, human, normal height, no augmentation, no biological overlays. Rowan answered. Silence fell again. But this violates established pairing logics. Aid, a younger elder. She failed all lattice synchronization protocols. She didn't fail, Rowan said gently. The protocols did. Another hush. Then from the back of the chamber, a voice. Why now? It wasn't accusatory. It was simply lost. Juno turned toward the speaker, a tall Velen woman with pale blue veins running through her temples. She looked confused, almost childlike. I don't know, Juno said honestly. Maybe my body never needed permission, or maybe I just needed to stop being measured to start becoming. Rowan added, life isn't built from approval, it's built from trust. From what survives, they let them leave without ceremony. No applause, no sentence, no reprimand, just a corridor of watchers quiet and waiting. As Juno and Rowan stepped back into the daylight, the air felt different, sharper, clearer, a kind of stillness that only follows disruption. They didn't deny it, she said softly. They didn't. They didn't accept it either. They will. She paused, rested a hand on her belly. It's strange, she whispered. For so long I thought I was a defect, something broken. But it was never about lack. It was about timing, about being seen. Rowan looked at her, eyes soft. And no, you're not just seen, you're becoming something they didn't know could exist, a future, she said. He smiled. Hours, weeks passed. The whispers didn't stop, but they changed. Curiosity replaced cruelty. Thieterman parable stopped appearing in daily logs. Medical protocols were rewritten. Files once stamped with inactive were reopened. Others began coming forward. Humans, outliers, the overlooked and cast aside, asking to be reevaluated. Juno didn't speak in public. She didn't become a symbol. She just lived, worked when she had the energy, rested when she didn't, let Rowan hold her when the aches made her bite her tongue. He built a hammock from reclaimed cargo mesh, adjusting it daily to her growing weight. She let him braid her hair. Sometimes in return, she made him eat on schedule. Neither called it love, but both knew. And late at night, when she lay on her side, one hand pressed to hair-rounding belly, she whispered stories to the life inside her about broken scanners, twisted vines, cold-eyed women, and the quiet man who'd seen her before anyone else did. When the child stirred for the first time, no more than a flutter, she cried, not because it hurt, but because it didn't. She had always believed pain was the only way her body could speak. Now it spoke in movement, in warmth, in possibility. Juno was never small, not in body, not in spirit. And now no one could deny her, not because she defied the rules, but because she redefined them. Because she carried something new, not just within her womb, but in her voice, her stance, her presence. Something no one had ever prepared for. Something the stars hadn't written down. A future they couldn't measure. The house was small, not by most standards on Earth. It might have been called generous, but for Juno, nothing ever felt size to her. The doorframe scraped the tops of her shoulders, and every time she reached for a hanging cabinet, her knuckles hit the ceiling. Given the furniture, specially requested, lightly reinforced, creaked faintly beneath her weight, but it was theirs. A two-room dwelling at the far edge off Northern Grove, built into the slope of a hill where the light caught the trees just right in the morning. Rowan had chosen it for the view. Juno had chosen it for the quiet. Now, months later, it smelled like boiled grain, warm milk and new skin. The baby lay against her chest, wrapped in a soft cloth woven from local vine fibers. She was small, half human, half mystery, all warmth and need. Her skin was pale bronze, with a faint iridescence that shimmered only in low light. Like a secret encoded in her cells, Juno rocked her slowly, humming beneath her breath. Not a melody, really, just motion made sound. The child made a small sound in return, a sigh, then a fist to the mouth. She's hungry again, she murmured. Rowan appeared in the doorway, ducking under the lentil out of habit. His hair was a mess. One sock was inside out. He looked like every man who hadn't slept through the night in weeks. You just fed her, he said, rubbing one eye. She disagrees. Juno smiled and passed him the baby. Their arms brushed his narrow frame, dwarfed again by hers, and yet in every moment they moved as if built for balance. When she stepped backward, he stepped forward. When she leaned down, he reached up. The size difference had become a rhythm. He cradled the baby in his forearm, his fingers dwarfed by her swaddled weight. You always make it look easy, he said, because you never saw the 30 years it wasn't. The home was simple, one low-slung bed, custom-built by a local carpenter after Rowan gave up trying to modify the prefabs. A desk wedged into the far wall, its surface cluttered with child-safe tools, old repair tablets, and one very chewed corner of a feeding bottle. Near the window stood the chair, her chair, built to hold her height, her weight, her frame. The only one that didn't groan when she sat, didn't tip when she leaned. He'd made it, with his own hands, layer by layer from reclamatic timber. She sat in it every night now, the baby tucked in her arms, the stars just outside the window. On evening, weeks later, Rowan was finishing the last of the night cleaning when he paused. At the doorway, Juno was in the chair again, one foot planted flat on the floor, the other stretched out comfortably. Her body still bore the memory of pregnancy, her hips wider, her belly softer, but she sat like a monument unshaken whole. Their daughter, slept in her arms, and Juno was singing. Rowan didn't interrupt. He just watched, awed every time by how someone so vast could hold something so fragile with that much gentleness. He stepped closer, finally laid his hand on her shoulder. She looked up. Tired? He asked. Always? She shifted, scooting to one side of the chair. No easy task when she took up most of it. Come sit, she said. There's no room. There's always room. He smiled and slid in beside her, one leg draped over hers, his head resting against her upper arm. She adjusted the blanket around the baby. The child's breath was soft, steady. For a long time they sat, like that, pressed together in imperfect symmetry, built from different blueprints, joined by something neither species nor society had words for. Not just survival, not just love. A new origin outside the forest shimmered. The elders had never officially declared the child a miracle. No ceremonies had been held, but people visited now, quietly, respectful, bring woven trinkets, sweet fruit, and soft wrap cloths. No one said much, but they watched. They remembered, and slowly the word and parable disappeared. From their chords it was replaced by something else, untested, unmeasured, unknown. Juno liked that better. After all, she'd spent her whole life being defined by limits. Now she was something else entirely. And in the space between too much and not enough, she had become home.